Hey, Downstater here. So, the KLR 650 is back. If you're like me, you've been perusing around and seen some pretty interesting responses, both positive and negative. One thing's for sure though, I don't think a lot of us quite understand the importance of what Kawasaki has done with this move. So, stick around, grab a beer, and let's dig into what this actually means for the ADV market. So let's face it, this bike is divisive. Surprisingly so, I've realized. You're either in love with it or it makes you want to puke when somebody just mentions it. Like many of you, I'm a bike guy through and through. I get excited about anything on two wheels coming out. 50cc scooters, 1800cc bikes, doesn't matter. I knew Kawasaki was going to do something. I knew they had to get back into this market. And we also saw all these oddly well put together teaser pictures like this one. And it got my wheels turning for at least the last year. I was more than hopeful about this. I thought it was a guarantee that Kawasaki was going to bring out a direct competitor to the T7. When I finally saw what we got, I'll be honest, I was kind of pissed. Like many commented, it did kind of seem like lipstick on a pig at first, and I was bummed out. I then slowed down a little bit, calmed down, and went and actually looked at what they specifically did on this bike, and quickly realized that it wasn't just a matter of slapping FI on an old bike and sending it down the road. They actually did a fair amount. So before I go any further, I'm just going to go through the actual improvements, not the specs on the bike, but the improvements from the old model to this one really quickly. So you have a new digital display with fuel gauge, a new LED headlight with bezel, a new LED taillight and turn signals, all new bodywork, a new larger fuel tank, a larger rear rack, increased carrying capacity. In the engine, you have fuel injection, revised cam profile, exhaust pipe was changed, updated clutch, increased electrical output, a low maintenance AGM battery, a lighter starter, ignition coil, evaporator canister, a new honeycomb catalyzer. I believe they also revised third, fourth, and fifth gear. At least I know third gear was changed. A new subframe, a new swing arm, a new larger swing arm pivot shaft, stiffer suspension front and rear, larger front disc, a thicker rear disc, which is great. They have optional ABS, stronger rear wheel, larger diameter axle shafts. They widened the handlebar and foot pegs and narrowed the body. Awesome move, good stuff. Rubber mounts on all the handlebars and foot pegs. A taller movable windshield, which is great. Standard OEM USB and 12-volt plug, awesome. I didn't even get that on the Africa Twin. A new seat design with all new materials, that's great. New pillion grab bars and a shorter side stand. So if you followed along there, that's like 31 really solid improvements on an already very proven, capable machine. After reading all that and kind of opening my mind a bit, I hopped on social media. I wanted to see what the public opinion was. It's always fun, and needless to say, you guys did not disappoint. Here are some examples. After reading through a couple more, I stumbled upon these two comments, and with the combination of actually looking and taking the time to see what they did and reading those two comments, I definitely had a change of heart and realized I was a little bit off base about this bike. The more I thought about it, the more this made sense. This wasn't a matter of lazy engineers or a company that didn't care or whatever all these comments I saw. In my opinion at least, this was a calculated, smart move on Kawasaki's part. They took an extremely proven, well-loved design, fixed all the problems, improved plenty more things, and shot it out the door at a price that all of us can afford. And that's something I don't think we can ignore right now. That last part is truly important. If they had done a full rubber up redesign like Yamaha did, I have no doubt this bike would have cost about the same, $10,000 to $12,000 when it got to US soil. Simply put, that's going to price a lot of people out of this market. It's just what it is, especially with the current economic situation. It's maybe something we didn't need after thinking about it for a bit. So let's also be clear about something else. The more I thought about it, if you ride one of these, or one of these, or if you're on an Africa Twin like myself, or a T7, Kawasaki was making two very clear statements to riders like you and me. One, they don't care about your opinion. Two, you and I are not their target market, and they know that. Japanese manufacturers are nothing but smart, pragmatic, logical, and forward-thinking. They rarely make dumb moves, I've noticed. They undoubtedly had plenty of meetings, saw what their competitors were doing, bringing these expensive, high-end, don't get me wrong, beautiful, awesome bikes to market, and they likely saw this gigantic, gaping affordability hole in the ADV market, and they pounced on it. So we talked about what they did and why I personally think they did it. Let's quickly hit on their competitors and see where this bike falls in the marketplace right now. The first bike I feel like I have to talk about is the V-strom 650 by Suzuki. Another pedigree, awesome adventure bike, been around forever, reliable as a hammer, just a good bike. But there's also no doubt that that bike is far more street oriented than the KLR. Can it go off-road? Of course. I've seen a good buddy of mine take one up some stuff that I know people with enduro bikes wouldn't have gone up. So yes, they're capable bikes, but there's no doubt that they are more street oriented. Also, that bike is about $2,000 more on US soil, and that's not something small. You know, that's a fair amount of money for people that are under a bit of a budget or, you know, are looking for a more off-road oriented basic bike. The next bike I wanted to talk about was the Royal Enfield Himalayan. I didn't even really want to mention it, but I felt like I had to because it kind of falls along the same category. It's a redesigned retro, basically. The only problem is, it's got some real problems. It really isn't in the same class. It's about the same weight with half the horsepower. And it's got some issues, like I said. Quality control is something they need to work on. There's been cracked frames, there's been foot pegs falling off, there's been a lot of rust and corrosion issues. It's just what it is. That bike is not quite where it needs to be, I don't think. And like I said, it's really not in the same class. The next bike I was going to talk about is obviously the Yamaha T7. It's what everybody's talking about in the forums. It's what everybody's commenting on, and I get it. It's an awesome bike, and I'm super glad Yamaha did it. It was really cool to finally get a unicorn bike. The thing is, it's exactly that. It's in a class by itself, and it's also about $4,000 more. Again, I don't think it's comparable to this bike. The last two bikes I was going to talk about are the XR650 by Honda L and the Suzuki DR650. Both bikes are pedigree, Japanese bikes. They've been around forever, reliable as hell. The cartels use them, Border Patrol uses them. They're good bikes, let's be honest. When those two groups are using them, you know something's right. But let's also be honest about what they're made for. Those are off-road oriented bikes. They're dual sports, in my opinion, not really adventure bikes. And I know you guys might, your heads might have just exploded a little bit. Let me explain myself. In my opinion, me personally, an adventure bike is about a 50-50, maybe a 60-40 street versus off-road bike. It's a bike that can go off-road very capably, maybe not single track, but is fine on most off-road surfaces, but is also great going for 6-7 hours down a highway at 70 miles an hour. That to me is an adventure bike. Your opinion may be different, but in this video, for my preferences, when I'm classifying these bikes, that's what I'm going by. So those two bikes, again, are really in a class by themselves. And I think that's kind of the point here. Kawasaki knew they could bring something to market that was, yeah, dated, but unique, and at a price point that nobody can touch for the quality and capability of that bike. So who's gonna buy this bike? The reality is, if historical data is anything to go by, a lot of people. This bike dominated in a lot of ways in this segment, and I have no doubt with this redesign, it's going to do the same thing. Whether you're a new rider who just finished your MSF course and you're thinking about doing a cross-country trip, I honestly can't think of a better bike for you to buy. I really can't. Maybe you're an empty nester with the kids are out of college and you rode back in the day and you want to get back into it. Again, perfect bike for you at a great price. Maybe you're one of these around the world folks who, knows that you're going to break down in some off the beaten path and you need to be able to fix the bike out there. There's been plenty of accounts of people on the high-end BMWs and the high-end KTMs who have trouble when they're going around the world. And that's a real concern, and it's something I can understand. If you're in like Nepal, I bet you could find rear bearings for the KLR. And I bet you could find a mechanic that could throw them in 30 minutes while you're sitting there drinking a tea. I can't say the same thing about a lot of the high-end bikes. It's not a knock at them. I love the high-end bikes. I wish I could have some of them, but there is a difference there and there is a real concern there. So do I have complaints? Yeah, there's one that I could think of that I don't think would have raised the price too much and really would have been a great addition to this bike, which would have been a 6th gear in the transmission. I will, however, say though that I noticed Kawasaki did 2 interesting things. Obviously they did the engine upgrades, which are more than likely going to give better fueling, better power delivery, probably a little more power. And they also tweaked the transmission. At least I know for sure 3rd gear was changed, and I think 4th and 5th were as well. My guess, again, Kawi doesn't really make many dumb moves. They probably addressed some of the power, kind of top end issues that the bike had with those revises. So while this bike may not be that unicorn concept we all had in our heads and we're excited about, I think the reality is that at $6,700, this bike will be an absolute bargain in this market and is just going to sell very well. Now I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion, and if you want to roast in the comments, feel free. But if you're a rider that appreciates simplicity, reliability, parts availability, affordability, and a hell of a lot of capability, I hate to say it, Kawasaki kind of nailed it on this one. And I get it. That's hard for me to say. It may be hard for you to hear, but I truly do feel that way about this bike. And I get it. Yeah, it's a little dated looking. Yeah, the components are a little dated. Maybe you could even say it's got a face only a mother could love, although I'd say that about a couple adventure bikes. But the reality is we all, I don't think, can deny that this was a fairly smart move on their part. The last thing I'll say is, like I said, I'm a bike guy. I get excited about anything on 2 wheels. I don't care if it's a scooter or a gigantic cruiser. It doesn't matter. I'm pumped about it. And anything that's going to bring more people into this sport, especially into the ADV world, I'm all about it. So I really do think this was a great move and something that I guess time will tell, but I have a pretty good feeling the market is going to respond positively. So if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment. Let's talk. Keep it civil if you don't mind, but I try to respond to everything, and I think this is a good starting off point to get the discussion going. If this video brought you some value, I'd always appreciate any likes and subscribes. I'm definitely building a kind of multifaceted channel here, and we'll see where it goes. Thanks for tuning in. Till the next one.